It's good to see you. Yeah.
Craig, it's great to see you. Man, you got the right coffee mug. I mean, you got all the props in place.
Yeah.
You got the right shirt. I mean, you look like you're loaded for bear.
Yeah. This is I got this at Camp Pendleton when I went out there to visit an old Marine Corps buddy about a year or 2 years ago. I thought better than you since 1775. That's about right. That's the Marine Corps for you.
Absolutely. Hey, we got a big birthday coming up.
We do 250 years, and actually, this year marks 30 years ago I went to Marine Corps boot camp. So,
Really? So,
yeah.
what year did you enter the Corps? What year were you introduced to your drill instructors and the
Yeah,
yellow print?
joined the Marine Corps November 13th, 1995. It was the day before the first Bill Clinton shutdown. And so we never got a follow-up group. So I went through boot camp with 36 people in my platoon. We got extra special attention from the drill instructors because there were 5 of them for 36 of us.
You only had 30. You started with 36 privates?
Yeah, because we showed up and the government shut down the next day, so they never brought anybody else, and they just started training. There were 36 of us.
So you went into receiving barracks with 35 recruits. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
36. Yeah, it was good training. And as a Marine yourself, those drill instructors put in a lot of work to get us to where we go. One of them will stick with me forever, Staff Sergeant Stewart. When I re-enlisted the last time in 2003, I had bumped into him at Pendleton. He was a warrant officer, and he was the officer that re-enlisted me. So he trained me and then did my last enlistment into the Marine Corps.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
dude.
those drill instructors don't get enough credit. I mean, the the category we seem to put them in is just a bunch of guys running around giving privates a hard time, yelling and screaming and kicking over foot lockers and stuff like that. But there is an art and a science, and I would love to see the training that they go through to become drill instructors. You have to go through a very rigorous course that's not everyone makes it. And those guys that come out of there, they're amazing men.
Yeah, and what most people don't know about the drill instructors is they don't get a lot of time off while they're on that duty. They're with the recruits all the time. They rotate days off where they don't have to sleep in the barracks, but there's always 1 or 2 of them in the barracks with them. And it's a full-time job making Marines. It's a lot of work. Much respect for them.
What was when I went in '82? It was 12 weeks. What was it the same when you were in? Basically 10 years later when you went in.
I believe so. For me, it's hard to remember. So I was before the new Crucible era stuff, and so we had to do our final drill and final physical fitness tests and all that stuff the last few weeks. And I had broke my left foot and got dropped from training about 3 weeks before graduation. So it was devastating. I had my plane tickets home. I had my uniforms, my name tapes on them. I just had to finish the drill in the PFT, and so I had to go and let my foot heal. And then I was sent back to training. So when I graduated, I didn't graduate with the Marines I started with. And I went to boot camp November of 95, and I graduated in April of 96.
Wow. So you got so when you rotate, you get dropped into a like a holding platoon or
It's
what do
called
they call
medical
it?
platoon. Yeah.
Medical platoon. Okay. I know they've got the fat body. At least they did when if the guys that were out of shape that
Yeah,
just
with the
did
red stripes around their shirt to identify them.
yeah, that
Yeah.
I forget what that was. Motivation platoon, I think, is what we called it. And
We called
they
them
were
fat
there
bodies.
until you could be brought up to speed and then dropped into another, basically pick up where you left off in the training program.
Yeah, I'll never forget that when I was going through the medical analysis, They, you start out, you walk a little bit every day, and then they slowly work you to running 3 miles a day. And my last meeting with the doctor, he had me jump up and down on my left foot, and it hurt so bad. I started crying, and I mean, didn't bawl, but I had tears coming out of my eyes. And the doctor's like, "You okay?" And I said, "I'm just happy that I'm going to graduate boot camp." And so he signed my form and sent me back to training. And I just dealt with it. I thought, I don't want to be here anymore. Nobody wants to be in boot camp for 6 months, because even though you're in medical platoon, you still don't get the liberties of a normal Marine. You're still watched by DIs all day. You can't go to the store. You can't make phone calls. You can't do any of that stuff. It's like
You're still a recruit. You're not
Yeah.
you're not a Marine yet. I mean,
you haven't earned the title yet.
right.
So yeah, it was an interesting experience.
That is so, I did not know that about you. That's very, very interesting. But it's a life-changing experience. It's not for everybody. But man, oh man, it is. I remember it was one of the best things I ever did, and glad I did it. And you never forget your drill instructors, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it's not for everybody. I would say not everybody can do it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes United States Marines so special, is you really have to commit. I mean, there are people that go above and beyond. You talk about Navy SEALs and some of the other guys, but just going through Marine Corps boot camp alone is a whole level of mental gymnastics and physical fitness that you have to accomplish something, and you have to want it. You have to believe that you can do anything by the time you graduate. And that's what makes Marines so highly successful on the battlefield. And actually, that's one of the reasons why, the Secretary of War recently, when he did a speech, was talking about fat military members and warfighting standards. That's something that's important. It needs to be addressed, because the War Department is for defending this nation, and you need people that are functioning, in shape, and able to execute missions. And I've seen that. I did 3 combat tours. A lot of people don't know, I was on the USS Peleliu, assigned to the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, Joint Task Force Enabler, in Darwin, Australia, on September 11, 2001. And so we ended up being the first official ground units in Afghanistan. I went in with General Mattis and Task Force 58 and took over the city of Kandahar. And when you see warfighting up close and personal, you realize it's not for the weak of heart. We don't need this transgender stuff in the military. You don't need out of shape people. You need reliable people that you can depend on to do the right thing, that have your back.
So I take it you are, we can check the box that you are in approval of what Secretary of War Hegseth is attempting to do with our armed forces at this point.
Yeah, I think it's something that's needed to be done for a long time. The military is not a country club. It's not for the faint of heart. It's for people that are willing to lay down their lives for this country. And on the flip side, that's why I'm always against politicians that are warmongers, because we get involved in a lot of conflicts around the world that really have no national interest. And so we should protect our young men and women that sign up for the military at all costs, but they should be a hammer. And when we send them, they should break something. It's something that needs to be addressed. It should have been addressed a long time ago. It's gotten out of hand.
What do you think? I mean, I can only imagine what Secretary Hegseth, and I don't think he came into it blindly. He's obviously not naive. He's no dummy. He's been concerned about the state of our military for a long time, like many of us have been. We've watched what's happened, not just the fattening overall of the troops, which I must say, I've got to put a little asterisk there. The Marine Corps, I think, did better than all the branches as far as maintaining standards and keeping things high. But, even under the pressures of the Obama administration, the Biden administration,
the Clinton administration, it goes way back.
Yes, the Clinton administration.
And the standards have been way off. I served from 95 through 06. And here's an example. I served with people that were female Marines that worked in my same MOS with my job in the military. And you get promoted based on your proficiency and conduct marks, your rifle score, your physical fitness test, but their physical fitness standards aren't the same as ours. So it never made sense that their promotions were the same as ours. I personally knew a sergeant, a female sergeant that had 3 kids, and God bless it, I'm all for women having children, but the military didn't issue those kids. The military is looking for military members that can serve. And so what had happened, because she was on paternity leave for so long, and then when she came back, she had a certain amount of time to get up to physical standards and got pregnant again and then went back on paternity leave. She hadn't done a PFT in almost 3 years, hadn't been to the rifle range, hadn't done any of that stuff. But when she came up for promotion, she got promoted. So, those standards, it's not fair to treat everybody equal, because I'm a big original intent constitutionalist. We were all created equal. We all were given rights by God, and under any circumstance, somebody should be treated equal. If a female wants to serve in the military, great, more power to them. But they should be able to maintain standards of the men that are serving right next to them.
Wow. Okay. So you went there, man. We're off the political correctness train. Love it. Absolutely love it. And I couldn't agree more with your sentiment. The military, who was it? Was it Sergeant Major Daly or was it Chesty Puller that said, hey, if the Marine Corps wanted you to have a spouse or have kids or whatever,
they would have issued it to you.
Who was that coined that? It was one of those two, I think.
I don't recall which one did it, but I do remember hearing that if they wanted you to have a spouse or children, they would have issued them to you. And so, on the flip side, a lot of military members get upset with me because when you talk about pay for military, my father was a United States Marine, and I've seen what he was paid, and I remember what I was paid when I first went in '95. And you look at some of these guys now, and it's funny, especially on the conservative side of the political table. Everybody's always like, pay the military more, they put their lives on the line. This is true, but we're not currently in a draft like Vietnam, right? This is an all voluntary force. These men and women know exactly what they're signing up for when they sign up. This should not be a place to go and make a lot of money, right? There are certain aspects of the military, and anybody that's served and's honest will tell you, if they're not in a combat zone, there are times where they don't work a whole lot. They might go to an office during the day, but they don't have a whole lot going on. They smoke and joke, sit around the water tank sometimes, especially if they're not in an infantry unit doing training all the time. And some of the pay has gotten ridiculous for some of the military members, which leads into our budget problems that we have in the federal government.
Man, I am so glad you brought this up. I have been extremely unpopular, not only with military, but as you know, I was a cop as well. And I feel the same way about law enforcement.
And firemen, they're paid too much.
They're paid too much. And people will say, my gosh, they're putting their lives on the line. They need, okay, then what's that amount? What do you pay somebody for putting their life on the line?
Yeah.
If you start going down that trail, because here's what I think, again, an opinion, and I'm not even asking you to agree or disagree or whatever, but as soon as we start making pay a method of attracting members, then you start bringing in people that are not there for the correct reasons. Again, maybe an unpopular opinion, and I'm with you. I remember being in the Marine Corps, and dude, it was almost unfathomable to even buy a car until you were at least a sergeant. Yeah. Nobody had the money for, a house. I'm seeing, how do sergeants or corporals buy homes? I'm like, what has happened here? This is crazy.
Yeah, my first duty station was Conway Bay, Hawaii. And, being a young man, I think my paychecks were around, might have been $400 every 2 weeks. The government gives you a barracks to live in. They give you a chow hall to eat out of. They give you free medical. What's all the other money for but you get free college while you're in there. There's so many advantages to being in the military for so many people. And I agree with you. It's the same with the police officers and the firemen. If you get it to where you're paying, you get people that play the political game. This is what Secretary of War was talking about. They play the political game and move up in the ranks. And this is why you've seen a degradation of our local police forces and some of our military units, because it's more about being politically correct than somebody who just loves being there and wants to do that job. And a lot of the officers that I know definitely are great cops. A lot of cops are hardworking, love their country, love their community, want to keep people safe. And my heart goes out for them right now, because you have a lot of prosecutors the officer arrests somebody, it doesn't help if the prosecutors aren't prosecuting and the judges aren't putting people in jail. And this is why we have massive crime problems across this country, because you have these liberal progressive judges that are trying to interpret their own version of the law or give everybody a second chance. When you see somebody outside that has 14, 15, 16 felony convictions and is still walking the streets, as a society, we should ask ourselves why.
I agree. And again, people outside that have not served in the military or not been in law enforcement or any of these things, maybe I can understand why they would feel the way they do, because they look at that and they go, well, man, I would never do that. These poor guys, these poor gals, yeah, they should be paid more. But I think it's something internal. It's, do you want to serve? I think public service is public service. It's not
Yes.
about enriching yourself. That's why I left law enforcement after, almost 6 years. I wanted to go make money.
Yeah.
And law enforcement wasn't going to provide that. So you go into private industry, you go into the marketplace, and you pursue, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just think as soon as things like the military or law enforcement or areas of school teachers, as soon as it becomes all about the money and your career, that's when you start having people doing crazy, goofy stuff because they're protecting their pensions, they're protecting their paychecks, they follow orders they should not be following because they're making a good living. And
it's their livelihood.
Very problematic. Very problematic.
Yeah. And, I would never presume to speak for someone else or their mind. I can only talk about my own life experiences. But for me, I joined the Marine Corps at 18. I came from a middle-class family. We weren't poor. My parents had money. I joined the military because I wanted to serve and I wanted to travel. I wanted to go see something other than Houston, Texas. And then after 10 years of service and 3 combat tours, I got out because I was tired of all the death in combat. And when I got out, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and money really wasn't on my mind. I got lucky and was intelligent enough to get a good job. But you're right. The military is not, I never sat in the military thinking I'm going to get rich being here. I guess I could have played the retirement game and went for the 20 years to get a retirement out of the military, but I just couldn't take any more combat tours. I'd watched too many people die. I'd seen too much death. It was time to move on to something else. That takes a toll after a while.
Yes, it does. And man, that opens up all, why, endless wars. And you mentioned it earlier, sending our troops into places in the world we have no business being, engaging in conflict where people die.
Yeah.
And not just the people that die, but people get maimed. People get injured mentally. I mean, there's the cost is, I don't even know how you even quantify the cost.
Yeah, the endless wars are what bothered me. When I went in Afghanistan in November of 2001, I understood the purpose of that. We were after Osama bin Laden. Looking back on that now, when he was in the Tora Bora region, we were close. We had 1,000 Marines on the ground close to that region, and they were issuing us cold weather gear, talking about sending us in there to go through the Tora Bora region to capture and kill him. President Bush, in all his wisdom, decided to allow the Northern Alliance people to do it with their CIA operatives assisting them. And that's how bin Laden escaped. But then we went into Iraq, and I still, to this day, I ask myself why. What was America's interest? What was the national defense of invading that country and the devastation that we caused? Or even when we don't send troops in, you look at what Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama did in Libya, in Egypt, and some of these other countries that we allowed to fall, or the CIA trying to put a regime in Argentina and causing all the problems down there. Just the U.S. meddling in other countries around the world has caused us a lot of problems and lost a lot of treasure. And that's why we're $37.8 trillion in debt today.
38.7 trillion.
37.8.
37.8. Craig, one thing I do know about you, you're very, very intelligent. I'm not just saying that to blow smoke up your skirt or anything like that.
The glasses, man.
What, do what?
It's the glasses.
It's the glasses. Okay. What is $1 trillion? I just want to ask, I like asking people, what is $1 trillion? What is that?
I always tell people when they talk about it, that's a number I personally can't quantify to you. I don't know that I could comprehend that myself, but I will tell you what's terrifying is this year, the interest payment on our debt passed $1 trillion a year alone. And so that's a devastating fact.
What do you mean? Okay, for those in the peanut gallery, the interest on the debt, what debt? Break this down a little, because these are terms that are kicked around a lot, and I think they just fly by people. Let's just talk about this for a minute. What
Okay.
$1 trillion in interest on the debt? Break it down a little.
I mean, to really get into this, you got to talk about 1971. That's really where it's actually, you have to go even further back to 1913. 1913 was probably one of the worst years.
Yes.
In the U.S. history. That's when we got the 16th and 17th Amendment. The 16th obviously gave us the income tax. They had tried a federal income tax before that. The Supreme Court shot it down because it wasn't equally applied to the states based on population, which the Constitution stated it should have been. The 17th Amendment allowed us to directly vote for our U.S. senators, which was a travesty. Before that, our state representatives elected 2 senators in Seminole, Washington. And the point of that is the main jobs of senators is judges and treaties. And so the states had a vested interest in picking somebody that would protect states' rights. But back to the debt, 1971, you had Nixon that took us off the gold standard. And that just allowed the government, along with the income tax, to just basically print money for whatever they want it, whenever they want it. You talk about the Federal Reserve. A lot of people don't know this, but we've had a few variations of this. We had the first bank of the United States of America that lasted about 20 years and then was kicked out. That was 1791. And then in 1816, we did it again with the second bank of the United States of America, and it lasted for 20 years.
Who got rid of the second bank?
Well, Congress authorized them, but they authorized them for 20-year periods. The first one was the Senate actually voted to a tie to keep it. And the vice president, George Clinton, voted against it at the time to dissolve that bank. The second bank, I don't recall. I think the Senate just let it shut down after 20 years. And that led us to the Federal Reserve, which also came about in 1913 because of the 16th Amendment and the income tax.
Yes.
And that was just horrible. But back to 71, when we got off the gold standard, then, there's nothing tied to the money, just print it out of air, just make it up. And so the government went on a spending spree, and it really wasn't that bad until Barack Obama hit office. And that's actually his $1 trillion giveaway money thing in 2011 is what made me decide to run for U.S. Congress the first time. And really get heavy into studying the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the founding documents, and everything about the inner workings of government. But if you talk about the debt as a whole, there's 4 main things that you really have to look at. Discretionary spending, Medicare, Medicaid, which is $1.7 trillion a year. And these numbers, they're not going to be perfect. I mean, you could Google this. I might be a couple billion off. It won't matter. Social Security is about $1.5 trillion a year, which is another thing because that's about to be insolvent. The Congressional Budget Office, I think last time I read, said 2036 or 2034. They won't bring enough money in to make the payments for the Social Security. The next biggest budget item is interest on the debt. So all the money that we have borrowed. And the largest holder of U.S. debt is actually the U.S. taxpayer. There are other nations that buy our debts, but the U.S. taxpayer is the largest holder of the debt. And that is about $1.05 trillion a year right now. And then defense and war, which is about $900 billion. And what's sad about our spending, I think this year, the last numbers I saw is we're spending about $7.4 trillion a year, which is running a deficit of about $1.8 trillion a year. So even if we cut all non-discretionary spending out of the budget, we wouldn't have enough money to pay off the $1.8 trillion deficit that we're running. So we would continue to incur debt, which means we'd have to cut non-discretionary or discretionary spending, which would mean Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, defense, something like that, and also raise taxes to solve this problem that we've got ourselves in. And it's a big problem. People don't realize it, but at some point we're going to hit a wall where bonds are downgraded, credit ratings are downgraded. The U.S. cannot print its way out of these problems. Another war comes up. The founders talked about debt being a problem, and they talked about the dangers of having such a massive debt. And so,
And that was back then.
Yeah, I just don't know how people in today's society haven't seen. Oh, here's a good quote. Ben Franklin actually said, "When you run a debt, you give another power over your liberty." And so that is a true statement. If you think about that, running this debt has given our freedoms away to special interest, lobbyist groups, politicians, other countries. We've lost a lot of what it means to be a constitutional republic and the freedoms that we were granted by the founders. And a lot of people, in my opinion, they think the rights that we were given by the Constitution, they view it in a black and white sense. I don't view it that way. When you read the founding documents, especially the Federalist Papers, the founders viewed it very close to natural rights and positive rights. And so, because our education system's so horrible, a lot of people don't even know what that is. But a natural rights, just think of it as an animal right, right? Things you have the right to do. You have the right to survive. You have the right to eat. You have the right to defend yourself. And then positive rights are government authority. The rights that we granted to the government, the enumerations in Article 3 of the Constitution, the 18 enumerated powers that the federal government has to bring us together as a union. And that has been thrown to the wayside ages ago, but that's where we are today. Debt.
Well, you're not painting a pretty picture, and I think the way that most people living in this country, most U.S. citizens, and I draw a very bold line of distinction between U.S. citizens and Americans. There is a huge difference.
What kind of American are you?
But all U.S. citizens, not Americans. Americans actually think about this, but U.S. citizens, which makes up the vast majority of our population, along with illegals that are here. But U.S. citizens, by definition, they've learned to cope with this through ignorance and apathy and bread and circuses. And I think that's why we just seem to keep going along like nothing's happening. And it's only a very small percentage of the population who are actually Americans that are aware of this, that can articulate the challenges with this. The problem is most voters, people that can vote, U.S. citizens, oblivious. They don't know. They don't want to know. They're terrified of it, and that's why they just blot it out and simply use excuses of why they're not going to be involved or don't want to listen or, do the whole nah.
Yeah.
And this is, at the end of the day, I think the biggest problem that we are facing as a nation, the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of people pay zero attention, and you know this by voting, because there's a large portion of the population that doesn't vote whatsoever. When I ran for office, one of the things I like to stress to people is I want fellow citizens that care more about their republic and the future of their children than they do about their local sports team. And
good luck. Good. What?
Yeah.
What?
And you hit me when you talked about the bread and games, because I study history, and that's one of the things. If Roman history is fascinating to me, and that's one of the things you look at what some of the Caesars did was they would put on these massive games to distract the populace from what was going on. But in my congressional district when I ran, there was roughly 600,000 residents, voters. My first race, I lost by 11,000 votes to an 18-year incumbent congressman, and about 200,000 people. No, 380,000 people didn't even vote. So, over half the people don't even go vote. And then the sad part is you have people that vote that couldn't tell you anything about trades, tariffs, treaties, economic policy, inflation, the printing of money. They don't know anything about the Constitution. I bump into people all the time that can't even tell you what the amendments of the Constitution are, what your rights are. I always stump people with the 9th Amendment. I always ask, that's the one I start with. What's the 9th Amendment? And nobody ever seems to know what the 9th Amendment is, but it's personally one of my favorites. The The ninth is the rights not enumerated. Basically, what Madison basically wrote the Constitution. What he's saying is you have rights given to you by God, and even though they're not enumerated in Article 3 of this Constitution, you have them, and the government can't take them away. And to me, the ninth is so important because a lot of people talk about the 10th Amendment, which is states' rights. But I don't care about states' rights. I care about my rights, my individual freedom as an American, as a human being, to live free the way I see fit. And that's what the Ninth Amendment was supposed to guarantee me. And it's totally been lost in translation.
Yep. Well, if people don't know what the Ninth Amendment is, all of the freedoms that we have are kept through exercising. It's like a muscle.
Yeah.
Take the Second Amendment, for example. If people don't have weapons, if they don't have armament, if they don't protect themselves, if they don't take personal responsibility for their personal protection and of their family and themselves as an individual, eventually the state, the government will just simply come in and start eroding, because if you don't want them, if you're not paying attention to them, if you don't think you need them, then guess what? The state will step in just as a natural course, and you wake up one day and you're not allowed to have a gun.
Yeah, Mark, are you trying to tell me that you need an AR-15 for hunting?
I'm telling you, I need an AR-15. I'm telling you, I need a grenade launcher. I need law rockets. I need anything that the government has.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research on the Second Amendment. I've picked it apart. If you look at it, the placement of the commas in the amendment itself is unique. If you understand English, they're causing for certain pauses in the statement. One of the biggest fears the founders had, and they talk about it openly in the Federalist Papers and some of their other letters that they wrote to each other, is a standing army. One of the scariest things now is all non-DOD government. There are more non-DOD government employees that carry guns every day than the entire United States Marine Corps. The federal government, employees-wise, on top of the military, has a massive standing army. If you talk about, the FBI, I mean, they even have guns in the Veteran Affairs Office, the IRS, places that just don't make sense. The Second Amendment's very clear. And anybody that wants to argue this just is not thinking properly. Any federal gun law is unconstitutional. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Any federal gun law is unconstitutional. You could argue what you want. The founders were very. It's open in the Constitution. The federal Constitution applies to the federal government. The government is not allowed to make laws pertaining to guns, speech, religion, and other things. And if you study history, up until 1833, in the state of Massachusetts, you had to be a certain religion to hold political office. Actually, the Catholic school system came from this because a school kid was spanked by a teacher for not reading the 10 Commandments out of New King James Version of the Bible because he was a Catholic student. And this is where the Catholic school started, because it went to the Supreme Court in the state of Massachusetts, and the Supreme Court said the teacher was justified. And so the Catholics got together and started their own school system. The founders knew the federal Constitution applied to the federal government. This is why each state has its own constitution. And the states were supposed to be experiments in democracy, where you had the ability to move from one state to another under the umbrella and protection of the United States as a whole. But that is so far long gone now. The states are subservient to the feds. Nobody in the states seems to have the wherewithal or the ability to stand up and talk about nullification of laws, repeal of amendments. I mean, the 12th Amendment, the 16th, the 17th, the 17th, actually, they already repealed. I mean, the 18th. I use that example because if people will tell me, well, the government doesn't make mistakes. And I'm like, they had the 18th Amendment that was passed in 1919, and it was repealed in 1931 because the government makes mistakes. And so we need to recognize that. These aren't some perfect human beings and individuals that we send up there to Washington. We're not supposed to be ruled over by these people in a faraway land that most are seen. Authority is supposed to be locally. The more local it is, the more control you have over your destiny. And that's really what I try to talk to people about and make them understand is allow your states to have more powers.
Right.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, in that, if you want to boil it down and go back to the origins, and again, it goes back to our population, our culture, our educational system, and how people vote or don't vote. And if you just let, especially the federal government, because it's so large and the bureaucracies are so enormous, if you just let them off the leash and let them run wild, they will not only run wild, but they'll come back and they'll eat the handler.
Yeah,
And that's
the
what
federal government has never shrunk in size. And Reagan talked about this all the way back in the 70s. Um, the government only takes more power and it grows and grows and grows. People don't realize this, but the federal government is the largest employer in the world. They employ more people than Amazon and Walmart combined. There are too many federal employees. And so we're in a quagmire here because you can't just shut it all down because you'd cause a massive recession of people losing their jobs because the private sector can't swallow all these people coming in. But we also have to address the welfare state that we become. We have a large percentage of our population that lives off the rest of us without any concern or care for what's going on. $22 trillion has been spent on welfare since it started. This is a massive transfer of wealth, and I'm all for helping my neighbor out, but I'm not all for the government doing it. That's what local churches and communities are for. People had more pride in their local community. People understood what was in their area. Right now, we send our money to Washington, and only God knows what happens to it because the government can't even tell you what happens to the money. Anytime they show you any sort of budgeting or audits, they've lost money somewhere. Someone's stealing it. So, and Madison talked about this clearly. If you read Federalist 41, he talks about the enumeration of particular powers to be inserted. If these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general powers, he's talking about Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, where it says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duty, imposts, and excise, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excise shall be uniform throughout the United States. Welfare was not meant to be what it is today. And most Texans know the famous Davy Crockett story.
Yes.
Where, he voted to send money to somebody's house that was burnt down and basically got voted out of office for it. But people don't understand. And when you talk about voters not understanding, I'm a big believer, and people hate me for this. They think I'm crazy, but if our government wants to maintain its current welfare system, changes should be modified, be made to it. And what I mean by that is if you're receiving government assistance, if you're living off your neighbors, you should be taken off the voter rolls.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
You shouldn't have the right to vote yourself more power and more money. And if you ever get back on your feet, because, hey, we're good people, we're trying to help you out. So you're struggling, right? You've lost your job, you're struggling. Hey, let's help you out so you're not on the street with your family. And if you ever get to the point where you're on your 2 feet again and you don't need help from your neighbors, then you can vote again. Or implement something where welfare and government assistance has a time frame attached to it. You're allotted 5-7 years, I don't know, pick a number, that you can receive it your entire lifetime. Yeah. But yeah, the welfare system that's been put in place is not what was intended. The federal government is not supposed to collect money and just give it out for benefit and reward to other people. And what makes me even more infuriated is when you find out the amount of money that we're sending overseas to other countries. I mean, prime example, we send billions of dollars a year to China for humanitarian aid, and China's buying our debt. So they're taking their excess money and buying the debt that's running up to $37.8 trillion, and we're sending them billions of dollars in humanitarian aid. This is, USAID special that everybody was upset when Trump went in and with Elon Musk and gutted that place. But this is the type of corruption that's going on, and this is our tax money. We come from a people that started a war over a tax on tea and stamps, and it was a minute tax at that. And even Mattis will tell you taxation with representation can be tyranny too. And that's
Amen.
really where we're at now, is because they've set up a system where there's so many checks in place. We have no way to push back against the tax that's happening to us. Your income gets taxed by the federal government. Everything you buy is taxed. Here in Texas, you pay property tax, and my property tax is actually more than my home. So I pay more in taxes for my home than I pay to the actual loan to the bank. You die and you transfer the money, you have a state tax put on it. I mean, they are taxing everything constantly, all the time, with no repercussions for what's occurring. And most people don't pay attention. And a lot of that, if you study historically in America, we're a nation of immigrants. I love that we're a nation of immigrants. I did the background check on myself. I have family from Ukraine, Poland, Scotland, England, and Ireland, basically. Some German too. I'm a mutt of Europe, it seems like. But the problem is immigrants used to come here and assimilate to America. Within a generation, they were no longer immigrants. They were Americans. They learned English. They learned our cultures. They celebrated our holidays and our traditions. You have generations of people now that have been coming for the past 40, 50 years that have no ties to America. They have no loyalty to this country. If there's a protest, they run out and grab the flag from their home country and wave it around in the streets. These are not the type of people that are going to make us a better, stronger place. These are not people that are going to vote in the best interest of the United States of America. You have entire communities in Michigan that are trying to implement Sharia law. This is not how this country is supposed to function. Yes, you can take immigrants, but they have to be vetted and they have to want to be here and they have to want to be American. And if they don't, then they should go home. Go back to where you came from and make that great again.
And they need to be, we can't be taking in over 1 million people a year, especially from countries that are not Western European or Scandinavian, or we're bringing in cultures that are naturally opposed to Christianity, for instance, to cultures that actually built the United States of America.
Yeah. We are a Judeo-Christian nation. The founders talked about it openly. This whole separation of church and state stuff has gotten out of hand. Basically, this shows the ignorance of most people. They hear a statement and they run with it, but they don't actually look to where it came from, because it's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. There's no separation of church and state. The federal government can't make a law pertaining to religion. They can't ban it, which they did during COVID when they shut down churches, and nobody seemed to have a problem with that, right? So when the government uses oppressive power to suppress conservatives or Christians, the left has no problem with that. The communists, they're just happy. But when you talk about inserting the 10 Commandments in a school, there's a problem with that. And, I always look back to John Adams. He has one of my favorite quotes from the founders. He said, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. And that's really where we've got to, is people don't want to know the facts. They don't want to know the truth. They want to know their little 15-minute TikTok line. They want to go out and actually, 30 second. Yeah. And I think a lot of the protesters we're seeing now, a lot of them are paid protesters. They don't really believe in what they're doing. I read a thing this morning online. Somebody said, I'm convinced if there was a zombie apocalypse, there would be pro-zombie activists protesting in the streets. And that's really, it's how we've got to. It's just a brain dead portion of the society. And the only thing I can deduce from this is that they have no desire for America to be America anymore. They want to fundamentally dismantle our country, our republic, and the freedoms that we have, and establish something else. And this is why I always caution people that talk about civil war and stuff, is you never know what the outcome of a revolution is going to be. You look at most revolutions historically. The Russian Revolution gave them communism. Mao's revolution in China gave them communism. Castro's revolution in Cuba gave them communism. So that's why I always talk to people about nullification of federal laws from the state level or secession of a state. Those are the two best options, because if you start some kind of revolutionary action, You never know what's going to come out of the back end. Look at the French Revolution. Robespierre and them started the French Revolution, and before it was over, they all had their heads cut off too.
Yep.
So I'm always very cautious of that. I'm more of a things can be settled with mass thought, good argument and debate. And I know there's a lot of violence coming out from the left right now that's trying to shut down debate, but stopping a conversation is not the way to fix that. And violence against them is not the way to fix that. There's a time and place for pushback, but violence should be the last resort in all efforts.
Yeah, no, I agree, because once that Pandora's box gets opened, you don't know what's going to come out on the other end. It was a miracle that when we had our American Revolution that it turned out the way that it did.
It's one of the few in history.
Yeah, it really is. And, when we had I call it the War of Northern Aggression in the 1860s, knowing what we know now and how that's all turned out and what's happened and where we're at today, and you look at all the amendments that have been passed since 1865, you sit there, I know it's taught in public schools that the good guys won, but, the founding fathers and their ideals and the originalists of the U.S. Constitution, those principles, those values did not come out on the other end in 1865 the way they were intended. And a lot of the things that we're dealing with today are from the outcome of what happened post the Civil War.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, people talk about the Civil War, again, history. It frustrates me so much when people say it was over slavery. It was over states' rights.
Oh my God.
Do you honestly believe or expect me to believe that some white farmer in the South that didn't own any slaves, took up a gun to protect the plantation owner's slaves and go sacrifice his life? It was about freedom of choice and states' rights. Slavery was bad and it needed to be done away with. And the founders put everything in the Constitution to do away with it, because Jefferson and Madison, when they were originally writing it, wanted to make notations in the Constitution about the freeing of slaves, but they knew the country wasn't ready. And that's why they put the things in place, because it was more important at the time of the Revolution to form the country and fight against England than it was to push the slave issue and have everything fall apart. It's all there. It's all historically there in black and white for people to look for it.
Even Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederate States, and there's quotes, he said it, slavery was on its way out.
Yeah.
The Industrial Revolution was taking care of slavery. Slavery was going to be gone. Even Jeff Davis, the generals of the South were more against slavery than the generals of the North. A lot of people don't know that. It was nothing to do with slavery. It was about the states' rights, and more importantly, individual rights that the federal government was massively taking over. And that's what the South stood up against. And
historical tidbit that a lot of people don't know is one of the first deaths in the American Revolution, in my opinion, would be at the Boston Massacre, when the 8 British soldiers opened fire on the crowd. And one of the gentlemen that died that night was a free black man that lived in Boston that was protesting his rights. But this stuff gets left out of history because it doesn't fit a narrative that people are trying to push. And sometimes I wonder if there are people pushing these things because it's the divide and conquer. You learn this in the military. They have us so divided and polarized in this country that people are really ready to go in the streets and fight each other, when the true enemy is the politicians and big interest groups in Washington, D.C. That's the enemy of the people. That's the enemy of our freedoms, our liberties. And I find it strange because, you watch online and a lot of people talk about conservatives are full of hate and they're fascist. And I just don't see that when I go hang out with conservative groups. They're very open. Even if you disagree with them, they allow you to talk. They don't overtalk you. They don't shut you down. I see the hate currently and the fascist-like activities coming from the far left. And it's not all the left, because I have friends that are on the left that are reasonable. I can have a conversation with. I disagree with them wholeheartedly politically, but the violence and aggression that I see out of the far left is disturbing right now. It's what's causing problems in this country. And it's mainly because of the media. The main media in this country has become a propaganda wing of spreading constant lies. I saw a report the other day still claiming that police officers died on January 6th. No police officer died on January 6th. Some of them that he was claiming died on January 6th died 5 months later from suicide. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of the story. Did he kill himself because of January 6th? I don't know. Maybe. Again, I don't presume to speak for people, but that statement alone in our TikTok society, the headline is what catches. And they're writing headlines that are misleading and outright lies. And the FCC should hold people accountable for this.
Oh, well, good luck with that.
Yeah. Well,
the FCC, a government agency, go to police. That's a pipe dream.
Well, they police when it's on the conservative. So take the Department of Education, formed in the 70s with the sole purpose of making sure every kid got a school lunch. And look at it now. It's trying to withhold federal funds to dictate learning standards to the states. The Department of Energy, also formed in the 70s with the sole purpose of reducing our dependency on foreign oil, still around, what, $20-30 billion a year budget. What didn't make sense to me is we have enough oil and gas here to make our own. If the Democrats would get out of the way and open federal land, which is another problem. Why does the federal government control so much land inside this country? Because the Constitution doesn't call for that. But, you know, in the Energy Department, they monitor their nuclear power plants. Well, the Department of War has the Department of Navy that has nuclear subs and nuclear aircraft carriers. Why can't we just transfer that responsibility to them and shut down the Department of Energy altogether? Why can't we get rid of the Federal Education Department, because education is a local community issue? Why can't we work on this debt by closing these massive government agencies that have no constitutional purpose in this country?
Well, if we shut all that down, Craig, it would be mayhem. I mean, the country would fall apart. There would be cats and dogs living together peacefully. There would be, I mean, it would just be, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what would happen if we shut down these federal agencies. I mean, it's like right now, this government shutdown, our society is falling apart. We got a government shutdown, and look at all the stuff, the horrible things that are happening, and the death in the street and people dying. And I mean, Craig,
I'm surprised I made this show today because of the shutdown. I think it's day 8 or 9. And my wife, are running low on food. We're afraid to go outside the house because I'm just sure society has fallen apart out there. You know, it's dangerous. The government shutdown, all that shows anybody that has critical thinking ability, what they should see during this government shutdown is they don't need the government. It doesn't do anything for you. It's not supposed to do anything for you. If you read the Constitution, the 18 enumerations in Article 3, other than postal routes, there's not a lot the government should do for you. You know, of the 18, 6 of the enumerations deal with the military alone. So now you're down to 12 that, you know, talk about postal routes, taxation, and some other things I can't recall. But yeah, the government's not supposed to be in your daily life. The state government, maybe, local municipality and city government, possibly, but not federal government. If you wake up and find yourself dependent on the federal government, you really should ask yourself where you took a wrong turn in life. And that's what cracks me up. Well, it doesn't crack me up. I find it interesting when you see these big disasters come through, you know, a hurricane or something, and all these people standing outside like, where's FEMA to help me out? And I'm like, where's your accountability? Like, were you prepared? How about you help yourself out? Why is it always someone else's responsibility to take care of you? Maybe the community and the church, but why should the federal government have to come in and save you after a disaster?
Well, who ends up coming to the rescue in the end anyway? It's the Cajun Navy.
Yeah.
At least down here in Southeast Texas, when we have heard, Craig, who comes to the rescue? Is it FEMA? No. Last I checked, it's the Cajun Navy.
Yeah.
It is the communities. It is the churches. I was out in the Austin area after the floods and everything else. It wasn't FEMA. It was a bunch of private citizens that came to the rescue, and they did a much better job, by the way.
That's how it's supposed to be.
Amen.
That's how it was set up. Is we live in very comfortable times, and we have a few generations removed now of people that have dealt with zero hardship in their life. We have people that haven't left the state they were born in. They've never seen a country outside of ours. Um, they've never struggled for basic necessities. I mean, we're the only country in the world where poor people are overweight. So, I travel a lot, and as I've traveled around, I've been to places where people worry about where they're going to get drinking water for the day.
Exactly.
These are
That's the
worries.
vast population of the planet.
Yeah.
They wake up every morning. Their first concern, clean drinking water. That is the vast majority of the planet.
And there's a lot of people on this planet that if they don't work a job, they know they're not going to eat that night.
Right.
And we don't have people in this country. Good. We're fortunate to be wealthy, but we're also $37.8 trillion in debt. So we have to address that. But people have to learn accountability again. Take care of yourself. I was in Houston, there was a hurricane, I think in 2011 or 12, Ike or something. I don't remember what year it was. I went like 17 days without power. And all my neighbors were freaking out. They were trying to find places to go. And I was thinking, it's still cooler than it was in Iraq when I was there in July of 2005. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But what did our great grandparents do before they had central air when they lived in Houston? And they wore like wool clothes and stuff. Like, you're not going to die. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be hot. You're going to be sweaty. Take care of yourself. Be prepared. Have a plan. It amazes me how many people don't have a plan for just simple emergencies that arise. They expect somebody to come take care of them. I don't know how you live that way, not being prepared for things.
Well, that's the difference between a U.S. citizen and an American. By definition, Americans are self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Americans are prepared. Americans don't ask for help from the federal government. U.S. citizens, on the other hand, they're the victims. They're the what's the government going to do? When's Big Daddy going to come and kiss the boo-boo? What is the government going to do to fix this?
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest differences. And our problem in America today is we have a lack of Americans, very few Americans. Hell, there's more Americans in China than there are in the United States today. When you look at the definition, American is an idea.
Yeah.
American is not geographical. In other words, if take the Chinese, for example, you can't be un-Chinese. Chinese is an ethnicity. It's a geography.
Yeah.
American is an idea.
Yeah.
It's a
mindset.
It's something that comes with a definition. It's lined out in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. You can be un-American, but you can't be un-Chinese.
Yeah.
You can't be un-English. But you can be un-American.
Yeah, and it's what made America so great for so long is the perseverance. The people here that believe they could do anything and they could achieve anything, and you put enough of those people together, and they achieve greatness. And we did that. We definitely won the Second World War. Had a big hand in the winning of the First World War. What we've done around the world to bring people into a more stable living environment, the inventions that we've given the world from American people that had the freedom to think here, the freedom to try their ideas, the private market, supply and demand really helps in that. The capitalist system for people always pushing to be better and achieve more. You're right. That's exactly what it means to be an American, to hold yourself to a higher standard, to be accountable, to strive to be better each day when you wake up, to do things the best possible way. And I think it's funny, a lot of people, somebody the other day was telling me, we were debating about the founders, and they said, well, the founders owned slaves and this and that. And I said, we like to think of ourselves as perfect. Americans were always number one. This is exceptionalism, but that's not true. And it's never been true. We shouldn't idolize anybody. The founders were human beings just like us. There are good people in this country that do bad things and make mistakes, but it doesn't make them bad people. I'm not talking about people that commit crimes or murder someone, but people make mistakes in life. One of the stories I always liked was Governor Morris. He was one of the founding fathers. And the first time I saw him, I was in the National Archives reading the Constitution. It's hard, barely reading it because it's so hard to read on that paper, but there's a big painting above it. And there's a guy in that painting with a wooden leg. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So when I went home, I looked him up. I'd never heard of him before. I just Googled, founding father with wooden leg. And apparently he was a big ladies' man. And he was having some relations with a married woman. And the rumor is the husband came home and he jumped out of the window and was ran over by a carriage. And they had to amputate his leg. Now, that's a rumor. How true that is, I don't know. I wasn't standing on the street when he jumped out the window. But it's stories like that I find fascinating about our country because, yes, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, these were intelligent, ambitious, Thomas Paine, ambitious men that did something amazing. Because we talked about revolutions earlier. It's very rare a revolution turns out the way the American Revolution did. And it's because of the willpower and those men sacrificing their sacred honor. And a lot of people don't realize the amount of men that signed the Declaration of Independence didn't prosper in the new country they formed. A lot of them were bankrupt or killed or imprisoned. They gave everything to give what we have today. And so, yes, we should look on their writings and what they wrote us and understand that they were just men too. And it doesn't mean that we have to try to outdo them or we have to knock them down. They lived in their time and they did what was acceptable for them. I find that fascinating when people say, well, so-and-so was a slave owner. And I'm like, well, that was legal back then. It doesn't make slavery right, but it doesn't make that person wrong because they grew up in a society where it wasn't wrong to do that. It's like going back and saying, a Roman was wrong for killing a Christian back in 100 AD because that's just what they did. They killed Christians, right? You can't judge history through the lens of what we look at today. It's not fair.
No, it's not. The other thing is too, and that people use slavery as just a hammer to beat people over the head with. And I remember back in the 70s, there was a very popular TV show that came out. It was a series called Roots, and had a major impact on our culture. Mm-hmm. And, there was these horrible scenes where I think one of the slaves, they cut his foot off and there was the beatings. And did those things happen during slavery? Absolutely. Yep. No doubt about it. There was some horrific things that happened during slavery. Now, with that being said, and I don't deny that, the vast majority of slavery was nothing like that. It was more like what we saw in the movie Gone with the Wind. Now, does that make slavery right? Does it make it more acceptable? No.
No, yeah. And actually, South America had way more slaves than North America, and they were treated much more horribly. Their survival rate was a lot lower. Historically, the worst slaveholders ever was the Turkish, the Ottoman Empire.
I was going to say the black slave owners in America were more involved with abusing their slaves than the white slave owners.
No, the Ottoman Empire.
If we want to go down that path, we have plenty of history that would, I think, shock and surprise most people living in this country today. Again, I'm not defending slavery.
No, it was horrible.
It's right. What I am saying is we've been painted a picture that's very distorted and very inaccurate. I heard Shane Gillis went to Mount Vernon and he saw Mount Vernon and everything, and he went into the slave quarters where the slaves lived. He's like, oh my God, that's horrible. But what he doesn't explain is the white farmer or the white guy, the white family living down the road from Mount Vernon lived in something very similar to what Washington's slave quarters look like. Yeah. Not everybody lived like George Washington or some of the very richest of their day.
Yeah.
Slaves lived in very similar conditions as the vast majority of the American population.
I think a large percentage of Americans today are disingenuous about their supposed anger over slavery. One, slavery's been gone for a long time, but
yes.
Two, if you look at number-wise, there are more slaves today in the world than there ever have been.
Bingo.
And nobody wants to talk about that. And so, that's fascinating to me is when you see people out on the street, especially young college women, like protesting pro-Palestine and all this other stuff. And I've been to Lebanon a few times. I've never been to Israel, but I've been to the Middle East in my military. I've been to Lebanon for personal reasons to visit. I'm very intimately aware of the situation over there, and Hamas would not care about these people, and they suppress women's rights. I mean, you look at Afghanistan, Iran, they murdered a girl for not wearing a hijab properly. Afghanistan, they can't show their faces. I saw a thing the other day that said a cat has more rights than a woman in Afghanistan. And so you see these people protesting for these oppressive regimes, and it baffles me. Either it's just a complete ignorance and lack of knowledge, or there's some malicious intent behind it. Because if that regime came here and took over and took all the freedoms they think they have with this crazy feminist movement, they would be very upset real quick.
They'd be very upset, and there wouldn't be anything they could do about it
Yeah,
or say about it.
I always joke with people. My wife's Ukrainian, and so I've been very close to the Ukrainian war. Now, I'm not a fan of sending money over there unwillingly to them, but if they want to buy weapons from us, why not sell them weapons and let them blow Russia up? I don't care. My family helped about 5 families get out of the country, but I always joke with people. It's like, a lot of the feminist ideas in Ukraine ended the day that war started, because men are being snatched up off the street and sent to the meat grinders on the front line. It was absolutely brutal when you watch these videos online, and women are free to leave the country. And so, these ideas always sound nice until you have to put them in practical situations.
Yeah, no kidding. And again, it's the media narrative that forms most people in this country, forms their opinions, and forms their ideas. And they can't think longer than to go past, they're just looking at memes on social media or what they're being taught in colleges, universities, our public education system, which, by the way, none of this stuff we're dealing with today could have ever happened without public education and public funding for our colleges and universities. That's where all this garbage comes from. And people are fed lies. They're fed all kinds of garbage, and they believe it because, well, that's what my teacher said. That's what my college professor said. That's what I learned in school. And here we are.
This won't be a popular opinion. I have children. I won't talk about age or who they are, but I dealt with college. And so when I see the kids that go to college and get completely brain indoctrinated and come out just crazy on the other side, I personally blame the parents. And again, I go back to accountability. People always want to point the finger and blame someone else. You sent your child there, and you should have maintained good contact with them, and you should have guided them. This is where I think our society's really failed lately, is we don't have men that understand what it's like to be a man. The sole purpose of a man is to protect his family and the people around him, to lead by example, and to have a life full of integrity. And I always say, integrity is so important because it's the one quality that nobody can take from you, right? You could come over to my house and beat me up and take my pride. You could steal my car. Somebody could steal all my stuff. Integrity, you have to choose to give away. You have to make a conscious choice to be dishonest about who you are and what you believe. What happened to the good old days where I could look you in the eyes and shake your hand and say, I'm going to do this. And you knew in your heart, Craig's going to do that. That's the kind of relationships I like to have with people. And if I find people have lack of integrity, I completely cut them out of my life. I don't have time for that. I don't want to be around liars and degenerates. And so you send your kid to this college, you should have maintained some kind of relationship enough to where you could be in control of their thought process and what they were learning. So they understood when the professor's saying this nonsense, that's exactly what it is. It's nonsense. I'm going to get a degree. And then, you have to ask yourself, what degree did they get? Because about half of them are worthless. There are a lot of really good.
Craig, you're being generous. Half of them are worthless. Half.
If you're not getting,
very generous right now.
If you're not getting a STEM degree, science, technology, engineering, and math, you're probably getting a worthless degree. Um, even school teachers, you don't need a degree. You can take some certs afterwards. You can go work as a plumber, an electrician. You get on the oil fields. I work in IT as a cybersecurity director. My company hires people with no college degree that just passes the entry level A+ cert, just so they have an understanding of computers. And now you'll make a low salary when you start, but that's the way it's set up in the system. Is we train you, our company will train you, not mine, but any company will train you. And as your skills grow, you'll make more money. You have these kids. I talk to college kids sometimes, and I just laugh and say, because they're going to have a hard reality hit them in the face one day. But they're talking about, well, I'm going to graduate and get a job making $120,000 a year, and I'm like, you're going to graduate and get a job making like $50,000 a year if you're lucky. And now you have these massive student loans. And a lot of them did even worse because they took out student loans not only to pay for their college, but they paid for their spring vacations. They paid for an apartment out of school. Some of them are paying for car notes with it. And because our high schools have failed, we don't teach kids about compound interest or interest rates or balancing budgets or anything anymore in school. And so they have no concept of what this debt's going to do. 3% on a college loan doesn't sound bad until you realize it's 3% on $80,000. Well, that starts adding up real quick, right? So it's a bill of lie that's been sold. And even all the way back to 1995 when I was in school, I remember feeling ashamed in my counselor's office in high school because they were trying to push me on what college I wanted to go to. And I kept saying I want to join the military. And they made me feel like I needed to go to college. And I didn't want to go to college because I was done with school. Now, I went to college after the fact in my 30s. Just more so to take some history classes and some IT classes and stuff I was interested in. But they push these kids like you have to go to college or you're a failure. And so, you talk about education. I'm a big believer. You want to fix education? High school should stop in 10th grade, right? At 10th grade, the kids get a choice. They're 16 years old. You get a choice. You can go to trade school for 2 years, or you can continue on to high school to prep you for college. And I know 16 is early to be making those choices.
No, it's not. You're an adult.
Well,
you're an adult.
You can always change your mind. How many people have lived their life and worked 4 or 5 different careers through the course of it? Because your opinions change over time. So 16 is old enough to make that kind of choice and go to a trade school and learn how to be a mechanic or a plumber or something. And if you're interested in college, then keep in high school for 2 years and do college prep work to prepare them for getting to college, because so many kids go to college now and have to take remedial courses, complete waste of time, waste of money, and waste of resources because the high schools didn't properly prepare them. I think it was Germany I was reading about does something like this. At 16, they get a choice. We have to reevaluate what we're doing. It frustrates me when people say, well, we've always done it this way. It reminds me of the military. They say, well, we've always done it this way. Yes. We used to always send fax too, but then email came out, right? I don't see anybody sending fax anymore. We used to do horse buggies and carriages, and then cars came out. I don't see anybody doing the horse buggies anymore. We always did it this way. It doesn't mean we keep doing it this way. And with AI coming out soon, it's really going to revolutionize the whole education system and how people do things anyway. It's really going to hurt the job market in the U.S., but that's a different story for a different time.
Yeah. But so one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about, because I can remember when you ran for Congress, the first time you ran, Brady was the incumbent, correct?
Both times I ran against Kevin Brady.
Both times.
Yeah.
I remember one time because, man, I really supported you. Golly, I wanted you to. It wasn't just so much disdain for Brady, but I really liked you. I really liked the type of man you are. I liked, the knowledge you had about our Constitution and the values. And I really believed that it's not that you were impervious to the garbage in D.C. and all the entrapments, but I believe that you were going to do everything humanly possible and try to at least throw sand in the gears of what was going on out there and the corruption. And of course, Brady, on the other hand, was just a complete horrible disaster, anti-American, antithetical to the Constitution. Yep. I remember one thing you did, we had a 4th of July. There's always a 4th of July celebration there in the Woodlands. They do a parade and all that. And you read the
Preamble.
Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Is my recollection
That's
correct?
correct. Yeah, I have a video of it somewhere.
Yeah. And, you know, it was very frustrating that more and more people, supposedly in the reddest county in Texas, perhaps maybe in the country, some people argue this, whatever. It's, for those that don't know, Montgomery County is a well-populated county north of Harris County. It is red. It's not as red as it used to be. It's going towards purple at a increasingly at a high rate of speed. But I was disappointed and disillusioned a little bit that more of the voters here in Montgomery County were just content to keep a politician like Brady and look at somebody like you. I don't think anybody thought anything bad of you. I just think
some people did.
Well, I think that was few, and that they were probably just Bradyites. But I was frustrated because more people couldn't distinguish the difference between you and Brady, and look at somebody like you and go, wait, this guy actually knows the Constitution. It's not that he just knows it, but he seems to love those concepts. He seems the concepts lined out in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I mean, that encapsulates you. That, and you were going to take that to D.C. and represent the people here there. I'm not there in Montgomery County anymore, but there in Montgomery County. And it was so frustrating. And I remember being with you the night of the election. I think were we at your apartment, or where were we at? We were watching the.
Yeah, we did it in my apartment. I didn't want to do anything. That was my second time that I ran. We met in my apartment at the time.
And watching the returns come in, and I know you were disappointed, and I know you really wanted to, and I really hoped you did, but it also was a learning experience for me. And many people since then, I think more people today might appreciate you now than what they did then. And I know a lot of people have approached you and said, hey, you know, Luttrell's not running again. And I don't know what else people have said to you, but I know you get asked a lot, hey man, are you going to run again for Congress? Are you going to run for office? Where are you at today with that?
Yeah. So first, thank you for the kind words. I've still fondly remember the first time we met. I think it was Panera Bread in the Woodlands. And
yes. Yeah, that's right.
We had a 2-hour conversation. I remember my chief of staff set up the meeting. I had no idea who you were, but I thought I like this guy a lot. There are people like me out there. You know, I learned a lot of hard lessons from those campaigns. Some of them were a gut punch. Like there was a young Marine Lance Corporal that had won a Purple Heart and had started an organization to help veterans out, which I'm all for. A lot of my speeches that I gave talked about the 22 veterans that commit suicide a day from PTSD and the bringing awareness to that. And this is why I'm so anti sending troops everywhere. But this guy actually set up a Facebook page attacking my military service and had hundreds of vets on there writing very nasty comments about me. And so that's when I learned that while the Marine Corps is a brotherhood, it's not always a brotherhood. Like when you're in the Marines, we always made fun of the 10%. You always have 10% that's bad. There are 10% that's bad out here. I had people that refused to support me because I had been divorced, which I found laughable. I mean, I don't understand what an understanding of the founding documents, the Constitution, and a love for God-given freedom has to do with divorce. A lot of people wouldn't support me because they said I didn't have enough money, but they also wouldn't donate any money to me, which seemed like a double-edged sword there. Well, you don't want to support me because I don't have money. And then, there were a lot of very Republican groups that removed my posts from Facebook, that refused to support or endorse me because they were scared of backlash from the congressman. It's kind of like what we see with John Cornyn right now, who's a Texas senator for 24 years, horrible guy, who the rumors are that he has threatened Trump that if Trump endorses Paxton or Hunt, I think is the other gentleman that's in the race, that he's going to do everything he can in between the election and him being out of office to sabotage Trump's agenda. But the problem is John Cornyn's been doing that the whole time, and they play games up there. In the Senate they have to get a cloture vote to move it to an actual vote, and so they know exactly what they're doing. They're inside the swamp. The other lesson I learned is it takes a lot of money to run for office. I worked a full-time job during those 4 years, and so I went to work every day, and then every night I was somewhere talking to someone. Every weekend I was trying to go to any festival or event and set up a booth and shake hands and meet people. It takes a lot of effort and money. I have had people talk to me about running for office again. Federally, I would never do it. And I'll tell you why. I'm convinced there's no saving the federal government. It doesn't matter if you put a guy like me in Congress, the machine's going to eat me alive. They're not going to change anything. They're not going to bring back our freedoms or give us more liberties. They're going to continue to grow and consume like the plague that they are. There's no resolving what the problem in the federal government is. And this is why I've been a big advocate for nullification of federal law from the state or secession of the state of Texas. But there's no idea of me ever, there's no point, because I get to Washington and I stand in the halls of Congress and talk about God-given rights and constitutional freedoms. Nobody's going to listen. Nobody's going to care. They're not going to vote on anything I put forward. The only thing I could do is bring awareness to how corrupt they are. But most people, like we talked about earlier, don't pay attention anyways. They're too busy watching their football team. So they wouldn't notice and they wouldn't care. I always say they really have us in a bad spot, because as long as we have shopping malls and movie theaters and nice restaurants and people can live comfortable, they don't really notice what the government's doing. This is why I was a big believer in the fair tax. If you're going to have a tax, do a fair tax, or have people write a check every month for their taxes instead of taking it out of their paycheck. Let them get the money and let them write that check and send it to you and see how upset people start getting.
Bingo.
That would be a big difference. But yeah, I don't think the federal government, Mark, is savable. As much as that breaks my heart, like I support Donald Trump. Does he make mistakes? Sure. All men make mistakes, but he's doing a lot of good things and he's trying. But there's no fixing the cesspool of corruption that's going on there. We have to look at saving the state.
So a lot of people, and I think, I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here because you know where I stand on this. Some people would say, well, dang, Craig, you sound, pretty cynical.
Cynical wouldn't be a good word. I'd call it realist. As somebody who's been involved in the political system and attempted that, I've seen the dirty underbelly of it that most people don't. I understand what's going on. It's like we have the other congressman here, Dan Crenshaw, war veteran, honorable service, commending for it, absolute horrible congressman. He's a warmonger, anti-freedom, anti-constitutional. He's very aggressive. He's trying everything he can to get in with the inside swamp. It's just proof that no matter what kind of man or woman that you elect and send there, that machinery there is going to eat them alive and convert them into what they want them to do. This is why you see time and time again, you put good people there, and over a long enough period of time, they either leave office because they just don't want to deal with it anymore, or they become part of the swamp.
No, I agree. I think I'll take it one step further, even more cynical. I think now that political office, especially at the federal level, attracts psychopaths. I think it attracts people that have no love for this country, have no love for the founding documents, for what America is, what America is supposed to be. I think it is now attracting, and when I say a psychopath, when I'm saying, and I'm describing evil, people will look at most of these politicians and think, well, that person's not evil. I mean, they're nice. They might be misguided. I'm sorry. I think what goes on, if people knew how evil Washington D.C. is, these seats of power like that, the corruption, just the vile activities and what goes on behind closed doors and how that affects us, and they have no regard, zero regard for you or I.
Your
They
freedom.
are out themselves, and that is it. Nothing else. You look at a John Cornyn, that guy is a piece of trash.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm trying to stop my cussing. I'm trying to be a better Christian, and I'm not saying if somebody cusses they're not a Christian. It's just me personally.
It's the Marine in you, Mark.
Well, I'm doing better. So I'm going to call him a piece of trash. Not that I'm trying to be kind to him, but it's people like you. I don't know how somebody like you today gets elected to federal. I don't know how that happens, Craig.
It's impossible without selling yourself to someone else. To get access to the money, you have to sell your vote and ideas to other people behind the scenes. Cornyn's horrible. I call this the Kevin Brady effect, and this is what I learned when I ran against Congressman Brady. He only showed up to one debate out of 18 that we did, and I personally would think that voters would frown upon that, but they don't care. If you're a congressman and you have good ideas, why wouldn't you come to? I understand the downsides of coming to debate because someone can attack you, but if you're doing the right thing by your constituents, why wouldn't you show up and defend yourself? And then the one debate he came to, it wasn't a question and answer. It was each one of us got asked 5 questions and got 1 minute to answer. It was interesting, but people loved him because he showed up to their little Republican and conservative groups and he smiled and he gave them some money. And so they all supported him, and they knew that if they went against him, they would be cut out of the loop. And so they want access to that power. They're willing to sell out their own children, grandchildren, neighbors, and everybody else for access to federal power for a host of reasons. They have their own special interests involved. Maybe they're trying to do some kind of business, or maybe they're trying to get some kind of law modified, or maybe they just like feeling important because nobody liked them in high school. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a horrible system that we have. And because, like Franklin said, I've given you a republic if you can keep it. Well, in order to keep a republic, the citizens have to be active. They have to be involved. They have to understand what's going on. And you can look by the amount of people that show up to political events or even know who political candidates are. That's why I was so happy when they took straight party voting off the ballots, because people were voting, had no idea what name they were picking. You should understand. And this is why we have so many judges that were bad. And then we have so many weak-kneed people, even in the state of Texas. You look at some of these judges we have that are issuing these orders. Why isn't any judge ever impeached? Because the state and the federal government have the ability to impeach these people. But Congress and the state legislatures, they just don't have what it takes to do it. And that's what you need. You need a warrior. And that's what, we think we're getting sometimes, and they get there and the machine eats them alive. And, Dan Crenshaw was an example of that. I remember voting for him the first time, and I thought, this guy's going to be a warrior. He's going to go up there and do the right thing. And he turned out
both, brother. You and me both.
He turned out to be one of the worst congressmen I've seen recently on the conservative side. And he's just a prime example of the machine eats him alive. And this is why I've come to the conclusion that DC can't be fixed. You're not going to elect somebody, even if you put in term limits for Congress and Senate, and you're rotating people in and out, it won't matter, because the money, the power brokers are still there, and that's what eats them. So yeah, that's where we're at. After that last election, because Steve Toth had joined that one, if you recall, and he had a really good name ID. I like Mr. Toth. I think he's running for Congress now. I need to reach out to him, see how he's doing.
We interviewed him. I actually, Travis and I interviewed him a few weeks ago. He had just got back from his interview with Tucker Carlson.
Okay.
And no, I remember because you were running against Steve. He was one of the ones in the race. It was the second time you ran, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so me, Steve, and Colonel Dean was the other gentleman. We'd all met beforehand
That's
and
right.
made an
Yeah.
agreement not to attack each other. It was about getting Brady into a runoff. And I think the three of us got 49.4% of the votes. So we were 0.6 away from getting the runoff going. But it was a lot of work. And I had met my wife, and she's from Ukraine. She doesn't understand the politics stuff. A lot of time consuming, a lot of hateful comments online. And she just asked me, she's like, I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't run anymore. And so out of respect for my wife, I stepped back from politics and I just completely disappeared for a while. But I have her full approval to do some podcasts. That's why I did Craig's Constitutional Corner for a while last year. And we made 8 videos about constitutional issues. And I'd like to start getting involved in it a little more. See if I can change hearts and minds.
Can people find those 8 episodes? Can they?
Yes, sir. Yeah. They're on YouTube. If you look up Craig's Constitutional Corner, I think the podcast site is Hank's Think Tank. If you find Hank Vat and Hank's Think Tank, you'll find those. And me and another gentleman sat down and did 30 to 45-minute conversations on different constitutional issues. We covered First Amendment. We covered welfare, Second Amendment twice, I think. We have a good conversation about an insurrection in Colorado back in the 1800s that a lot of people don't know about. And I always enjoyed those things because I love history. And so anytime I can sit down and do some research or read a new book and study some history, that's a good time. But yeah, as far as office, once I realized the federal government was gone, I started looking around, and that's when I bumped into the Texas nationalist movement. And I mean, they have a very well laid out, solid platform that makes sense. I've never met any of them. I think I signed up for a mailing list just to stay in touch with them. And then I follow a place called the 10th Amendment Center. They're based out of California, and their goal is nullification of unconstitutional federal laws. And I support anybody who is a fan of limiting the power of the federal government. I'm a believer. I'm a big fan.
That's awesome. After we spoke, I guess it was yesterday or the day before, I forget, days kind of run together. I think it was yesterday. I reached out to Daniel Miller, who is the founder and president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. I told him about doing this podcast today, and I asked him if he'd be interested in doing one with you and myself, and talking about, first of all, learning a little bit about your story and that you ran for Congress, and now you've come to the logical conclusion, and I believe there's no emotion in this. It's purely logical. And
yeah, I'm not upset. I love America, but the federal government's lost.
I agree. And it's not that America this is the distinction. And I try to explain this to people. There's a difference between America and the government.
That's right.
Okay. You love America. You served as a United States Marine in combat. You love America. I would die for America.
I would willingly die for this country. Yes.
But the government is done. It is, not only is it done, it's evil. It is corrupt. It is evil. It is anti-American, and it's dangerous, extremely dangerous. And I agree with you. I think secessionists, the idea of Texas seceding is really our only hope. And that's not even a perfect solution because Texas has its own problems.
Yeah. Our state reps right now wouldn't be the best people to have in power. We have to fix the mindset of the people before we move to any secession talk. And I don't know if that's possible, but yeah, when you talk about evil, I look at things from the federal level. There was a year where Nancy Pelosi, when she was speaker, spent over $150,000, your taxpayer money, on alcohol on her private plane flying back and forth to San Francisco to D.C.
Jiminy Christmas.
That's the lack of care that these people have for our money and our hard work. Because a lot of us get up every morning, we go to work, some people inside, some people outside. stressful days. They wonder how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to put their kids into college if their kids want to go. Are they going to be able to save enough money for a trip? What if their car breaks? Are they going to be able to fix it? I mean, people are struggling day in and day out to get by. And you have these federally elected officials that are just blowing money without any concern for what we deal with. And we're the ones paying for everything.
It's truly unbelievable. Now, there are people that will say, well, I mean, Texas seceding, that's impossible. You guys are living in la la land. That could never happen. What about my Social Security check? What am I going to do? Well, I've earned my Social Security check. How am I going to get my Social Security check if Texas secedes? I mean,
I have a solution for that. If that's their biggest concern, then they can move to Louisiana.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. I mean, if that's your concern, you want to live under a federal tyranny and you're unconcerned about all the loss of liberties and freedoms that we have because you want your Social Security check, then move to the United States of America and let Texas go. And then people that say that it's unconstitutional or the Civil War settled that, the founders would disagree when they broke away from England. Anytime a man faces tyranny, he has the right to remove those bonds and find liberty and freedom. And that's where Texas is at right now.
Okay, that was my next question. Speak on that a little bit. Within our founding documents, the founding fathers were very specific. They gave us specific instruction. The minute this government becomes tyrannical, you, the Americans, have the right to disband the government.
That's right.
We have the right. We have the right under our documents to do that, right?
That's right. And that's why the founders feared a standing army so much, because a standing army would be beholden to the federal government and not the people. This is why the Second Amendment talks about a militia. They wanted the people. And I understand in today's world, you need a standing army. When I talk about these things historically, people think, well, that wouldn't work today. Well, that's true. Certain things wouldn't work today. You need a standing army. I get that. But do you need 4-something million federal employees with guns?
Oh, God.
Do you need state and local police departments that are like military units? I mean, if we actually lock criminals up and punish them, if jail was actually jail again instead of what it's become, right now there's no way for the people to stand up to the federal government. I mean, realistically, yes, you get enough people, you could. The revolution was started by around 3% of the population and then fought by about 30%. So you had about 30% that supported England, about 30% that fought England, and about 30% that didn't care, give or take, because I'm 10% off on that. But yeah, the founding documents are very clear. Anytime the government becomes tyrannical or oppressive, now their solution for it was to break bonds with the government, which I believe is constitutionally correct, because the only other solution is a constitutional amendment or a convention of the states. But to do that, you need a majority of the states. And so one state could be locked in and beholden to all the other states. And with the current federal tax system, the way they can take money out of Texas and send it to California, we could be getting mistreated, right? Like the redheaded stepchild by the federal government. And there's nothing you can do about it. And we saw this under Obama when there would be disasters in Texas and they wouldn't send federal aid or declare federal emergencies for us because we were a conservative state. This is the thing the Democrats seem to do, is they tried to oppress. And Obama was far worse. Look out of Houston, the story of Lois Lerner. A lot of people forgot this from back in 2012 when she started her conservative movements and started getting OSHA coming into her business and the IRS auditing her. So the federal government has been attacking people for years, but conservative people. And I find it interesting because now you see Trump sending National Guard into cities to kind of police up all the violence that's going on, and people are losing their mind. But the National Guard's only guarding the federal buildings. They're not qualified, and they're not out there arresting people. That's not what they're doing. They're guarding a federal courthouse or a federal ICE agency. That way the police can do more in the local community because they don't have to guard their buildings anymore. But of course the media will lie about this narrative and try to confuse people to what the truth actually is. But you're exactly right. We have the ability, and that's why I kind of like the Texas nationalist movement, because I've never met Mr. Miller. Very excited to maybe meet him one day, but they have it laid out very clearly of a legal process through voting to push the state to this level. And so why not get to the point where we can at least put it on a state ballot and see what the voters think? I don't understand why the state won't even allow that to occur. They're oppressing that topic right now.
Craig, you know why they won't allow it on the ballot.
I know why, but we're on a podcast, and so I want people to think of the answers to the questions. I've researched. I know the answers to the questions because the states are almost as corrupt as the federal government. That's the answer. You look at the school districts. I hear people all the time. They talk about how bad the school districts are, and they say, well, schools should be locally controlled. I agree, 100% should be locally controlled. But how do you control a school district? Because nobody votes. And so you get these members on the school board that put a superintendent in that has communist ideas and allows transgender people to come read to your school children and has sexualized books for them to read. And then by the time you can put together somebody to run on a school board against them, problems have already set in. Why is it that since 1970, the money we spend on education has gone up like 60% per child, but the level of education has gone down? See, I graduated high school in 95. I think if I remember correctly, you graduated in 82.
Yes.
I bet you were smarter than me when you graduated. And I bet a generation before you, they graduated and they were learning Latin and advanced mathematics, right? We have people that graduate high school now, and people will argue this. I've seen it. I've talked to these kids. They cannot read and write. How are they supposed to go in society and function and be a productive member of society if you can't read and write? And if we have kids graduating that can't read and write because George Bush passed the No Child Left Behind laws where they didn't care how bad you failed, they just put you to the next level because they needed that for federal funding, then why have public school at all? Because that's what it used to be. You had kids that worked the farm that couldn't read and write because that's where their family was. And we made the public schools so every child had the opportunity at an education. The problem is we still have the public schools, and I love them. I think every child should have an opportunity for education. But if a child's showing no desire at education, is it really our responsibility to allow them to be in a school to disrupt everybody else from the education they're trying to get? We need to, as a society, we need to start having hard conversations with ourselves. You can't always do the nice thing. You can't always do what sounds good on paper, because there are unintended consequences for every action you take. And those consequences sometimes come home to roost, and we don't like them. And so that's the problem, is because we're not allowed to be honest as a society anymore. We can't talk about freely what we think. And this is why the First Amendment is so important. People always say you want to control words and speech. If you say certain words, you should be fired. Or if you say certain things, you should be put in a closet. I think freedom of speech is important. It's important because it's how we come to conclusion of ideas, right? What are your ideas? What are my ideas? And if somebody's saying something that's outrageous, that as we, society as a whole, deems outrageous, it's okay for them to say it. It allows us to identify them in the public square as somebody that we don't want to be around, right? Instead of hiding it in the closet and having these malicious thoughts behind the scenes. But we've gotten to the point where I remember a few years back, there was a UT, University of Texas, I think was the school. There were kids that walked out of astronomy class, or astrology, astronomy, because the professor used the word retard. He was talking about an object from space coming into the atmosphere and retarding. And I'm going to say something that's offensive, but the kids were so retarded that they didn't know what the word meant, and they got up and walked out of class. And I thought, I'm a child of the 80s, where I think we're a lot stronger mentally because we hurt each other's feelings all day. And that's what kids do. Kids are mean sometimes. But you look at when we were younger, we went outside and played with our neighbors all day. That's where you learn social skills and conflict resolution. Your imagination ran wild. You played games with your friends. You definitely weren't eating McDonald's all day. Society has changed, and we allowed it to change because we stop focusing on what's important. And what's important is our family, our neighbors, and our community and our church.
I could not agree more. And one of the things that I point out along those same lines, when people are allowed to take care of one another, let me put it this way. I'll try to put it in an analogy. When you help someone out, let's say you find somebody that's truly, man, just a comedy.
Down on their luck.
What's that?
Down on their luck.
Down on their luck. I mean, and that happens. It's happened to me. And if it's never happened to, you or anybody, you're blessed, but it may come one day. So things happen. And I do believe there are times in some people's lives where, holy cow, the crap has hit the fan and they are in a pickle. When you or I take our own resources, whether it's our time or our treasure, and we help that person, there are two people that get blessed there. The person you're helping and you that are helping them.
Yeah. And
I truly believe that there's two people there that are being blessed. Now, if the government does that, so the only way the government can help somebody, Craig, is if they do what first?
They have to steal from someone else.
They have to steal, and that's what they do. That's what a tax is. They have to steal from someone else. So when the government helps somebody, who gets blessed in that equation?
The government.
Neither.
No, the government.
I mean,
because they get more power.
Yeah, the government gets more power. But neither the person that's receiving the help, because they're now a thief.
Yeah.
If they're receiving stolen money, they are part of being the thief.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be blessed. The person whose money was stolen to give to that person, they're not being blessed because they didn't voluntarily give that money. No one's being blessed.
I agree.
And so that's what destroys community.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked to some college kids when I was running for office, and it amazed me because they didn't understand the concept that the government didn't have its own money. That the government had money because it took it from the people. Like they thought the government just produced money. And so when they got government assistance, they didn't understand that they were really taking money from their neighbor. And so, yeah. And this is my big stick on taxes is I think last time I looked, the taxes, I think they bring in 1.7 trillion in income tax. Think about that money back in the local communities, what people could do with it. So a lot of people aren't in a situation to help their neighbor because the government's taking so much from them.
Right.
And so
exactly.
Yeah, this is why our communities have fallen apart, because there are still pockets of America where people value community, they value their neighbors, they go outside. But there are other places in America where I guarantee you, people couldn't tell you who their neighbor is.
That's exactly right.
They don't know what they look like. They don't know what their name is. They go to work, they go home, they go on their vacations, and it's just a vicious cycle because we don't have care or time to put into our community anymore. And because of that, we have no mutual respect or understanding of each other. And our society is breaking down slowly. This is why you look at Chicago, the violent murder rates in Chicago that people think aren't a big deal. These are higher murder rates than some third world countries. There's a problem in America.
No, it's huge. And, we can find pockets. We can find examples. I already mentioned the Cajun Navy. And for those that don't live anywhere near the Southeast Texas or Louisiana, the Cajun Navy is actually a real thing. And they're an organization of volunteers that have boats that whenever a big storm comes ashore, whether it's tropical depression or tropical storm or hurricane or something like that, and it affects a populated area, flood victims and so on and so forth, the Cajun Navy, this is not a government organization. This is a organization of free people volunteering their services, their time, their treasure, their resources. They mobilize and within 24 hours have descended on whether it's Houston, Texas, or Baton Rouge, or whatever, someplace along the Gulf Coast. They descend and they deploy their resources, their people, their boats, and they rescue people. And you've seen this at work, Craig.
Yeah.
And they call themselves literally, you can go online, look up the Cajun Navy, you can volunteer, you can log in, you can sign up, and you can be a member of the K. And nobody does it better. FEMA sure as hell doesn't do it as good as these guys do. These gals, I say guys, but it's guys and gals. It's mostly men, obviously, but and that is America. It goes back to de Tocqueville. America is great because Americans are good. And if Americans ever stop being good, America will no longer be great. And Craig, that's where we are.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
And to add on your Cajun Navy, I heard rumor that they all have a pet alligator in case the boat motor breaks down, the alligator can pull them through the water.
Yeah, they drop that tail of that alligator, and he starts pushing that tail and pushes that, that Piro right down the flooded streets of Houston, and they rescue people.
When we had Hurricane Harvey here in Houston, they came through like some champions, and that's what it's supposed to be. That's what I've been preaching to people for a long time is we're supposed to help our communities out. We're supposed to care about each other. People are anti-religion. Church is valuable because church is a sense of community. You got to find the right church. The problem we have with churches today, in my opinion, in America, is we have too many pastors that aren't biblical based, right? They're not biblical based, and they won't talk about politics in the church at all, and they should. And so that's caused a problem. But people often ask me, and I'll tell you honestly, I don't have solutions for all these problems. I'm not a genius. I can't fix everything. Even if you gave me Darth Vader ability, I couldn't go around and fix all these problems. These are bigger problems than one man. But I think
look at Elon Musk. He is a genius, and he has billions, and he couldn't fix it.
Yeah, and so I agree. But I think one solution to a path of fixing these is having honest conversations about what the problems are. Because for so long, we didn't even talk about the problems. We just ignored them like they weren't there. And that's what led us to where we're at today.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. Well, I can tell you this, Craig, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna have Daniel Miller. I spoke to him very briefly, and he was excited to hear about what we were doing today, and he looks forward to meeting you. And we're going to put together a discussion. We'll bring him in on this and get to talk to him because he's a brilliant guy. He's super smart. I recommend people get his book. It's Texit. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, but the title is Texit. It's by Daniel Miller. And it's literally lines out how Texas can secede. What would happen? What would that look like? Can we do it? Is it legal? All the constitutional ramifications and the U.S. Constitution, the Texas Constitution. It's a fascinating book. It answers all the questions that people ask when it comes to Texas seceding from the Union. But I think we would have a remarkable discussion. I would love to hear you two guys talk about your experiences. Daniel's never run for office in the U.S., but I know that he would love to hear your perspective and how you've grown through this and starting out, obviously as a patriot and somebody that did run for Congress. You even though you never made it to Washington, you saw a lot of how the politics works, the money, and I think we would have a phenomenal discussion and be able to do something because it is ideas. And if we don't win this war with ideas, if we don't win this war by talking about it, and I don't know if we can, I really don't. Charlie Kirk, that guy was a once in a century man.
I agree.
And they killed him. They freaking killed him, man. They killed him at freaking public in front of his wife and kids. So I don't know if we can fix this by talking about it, but I'll die trying. And I think that's what we have to do. And then whether people listen or not, that's not up to you or I. We can't make people listen. We don't want to make people listen. But if we can come up with enough good ideas, if we can get better articulating the ideas, getting the message out, working on getting the message, I think it's a noble cause.
Yeah.
I'm very, very thankful for people like you. And I mean that with all sincerity, because if we don't fix this in the court of ideas and freedom of speech, and you've already made references, and I agree, revolution, civil war, that's very possible. But I don't think people quite understand what it looks like in a population in a country the size of America with 350 million people, a lot of them armed. This is a very unique situation where we're at today in America. A lot of revolution stuff like that happened with unarmed populations. This is an armed population.
You don't want to be here if that happens.
What's that?
You don't want to be here if that happens. I have a wife and kids. Now, my kids are all older and out of the house, but I've been in war. You don't want to be here when that happens. A lot of people would be unalived very quickly.
Oh, the loss of life would. Well, what was the loss of life in the War of Northern Aggression? It was, I've heard anywhere between 600,000 and 800,000. A lot of those died because of things like dysentery and things like that. But still, it was an extremely bloody war. That war, we lost more servicemen, more Americans died in the Civil War than any other conflict we've ever had, I think combined, if I'm not mistaken. And that was, what was the population of the United States in the 1860s? What was it, 20 or 30 million people maybe?
Yeah, had to be 30 to 40 maybe.
Today, 360 million people armed, pissed, fighting one. Holy.
Well, yeah, the biggest issue people don't talk about, and this is a logistics issue. So the average city has a food supply for about 3 days.
Yep.
And this is what worries me if there's a federal collapse from a budget issue is you have anywhere, I don't have the numbers, but I've been told anywhere between 20 and 30% of the population depend on the federal government for daily life. So if those numbers stop and those people aren't getting their government subsidies, then what do we think? They're just going to starve in their house? No, they're going to take to the streets, riot, loot. Cities can sustain themselves for 3 days. In the event of a hot civil war, I guarantee you a lot of Americans would starve to death. That would be what would happen, because it would be hard to bring humanitarian crisis aid in here because most countries wouldn't care. We're the ones that take care of other countries. How many times you see other countries come in and take care of us? And so,
well, now wait a second, hang on. That's a whole nother. The Chinese might be more than willing to come in and
or Vladimir Putin,
be more than willing to come in and offer aid.
Yeah.
Craig?
I pray against it. I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior in Christ. It's the last thing I want. I pray against it. That's all I can say. I pray against it. If it happens, then don't be around me because I'll do everything I can to make it end as quick as possible.
Right. Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to keep talking. And
all
we're
right,
going to
sir.
keep, throwing out ideas, whether we're right or wrong. I think when I hear you speak, I know it's in good faith. I know that you're not being an antagonist, that I know where you come from. I watched you run for Congress. Your heart was always in the right place. I was always impressed, and that has not changed in you. And so we need to hand you a megaphone, and we'll set up this discussion with Daniel, and we'll put that out as well. And we just need to continue giving ideas, and hopefully pray. And again, and I'm a Christian too, and it's in God's hands, but we have to work like it all depends on us. I'm a big proponent of that. I'm not one of these that just says, well, we just need to sit around and pray about it. Nothing against prayer. I think we do need to pray about it, but God's not a God where you just,
I tell people this all the time. David didn't slay Goliath by praying about it, right? God has warriors in Christ. And so I will pray, I will hope, but if it comes to something, I will be a warrior, what I've been trained to do. So
amen, brother. Amen. And I really appreciate that. And I'm glad we're on the same side. And there's other people that feel like us. And, so at this point, we've got to keep doing what we're doing, pray for the best, and put in the action, not worry about what halftime shows going on in the NFL.
Who cares?
And actually get involved and protect our families and our loved ones. And so, man, I cannot thank you enough for sitting down today with us and talking about this. This has just been phenomenal. I've been excited about this. So where can people learn more about you, or how can they support you and what you're doing and that type of thing?
They can support you. That I don't have anything public that I do right now. I don't have any podcasts. I don't have any organization. They can support your organization. I'm sure y'all.
Well, maybe we need to change that, Craig.
Well, I like to share my thoughts. Like I said, I win hearts and minds. I'd like to think that I can do that and maybe open some people's eyes to what the Constitution's supposed to be, what actual liberty and freedom looks like. But I don't have any public footprint right now, and I'm not pursuing that at this point. And so, yeah, support. If anybody likes what I said, they can support you for giving me the opportunity to share that message.
Okay. Well, we're going to have you back, and we're going to take you up on that offer. And we're going to do more of this, and we're going to put this out. Obviously it's in its entirety. We'll also be posting some shorts and everything, because YouTube does like the shorts, and there'll be plenty of those snippets that we'll be able to use throughout this conversation and energize that. And, I'm telling you, I think great things start with sometimes very modest beginnings. And especially if you pray and you ask God to bless what you're doing. And I think that's where we're at, and that's what we're going to continue doing. So again, I cannot thank you enough for this and the opportunity to sit down and visit with you. And I look forward to our conversation with Daniel Miller.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you very much. Hang on for a second here. I've got to